Greg, great to be here. If there's one thing I love talking about, it is basketball in the best conference in America as well. So happy to join and give a little Big 12 flair today.
Absolutely. And Drake, I do need to get your thoughts on what we've seen in the first few weeks of the Big 12 because my biggest takeaway is that home court advantage, while it always means a ton in the Big 12, there's no question about it. It feels like it just has amplified in how much it does truly mean just because with the travel being a bit more spread out with teams having to go to the state of Florida, having to travel out to Utah to play BYU. I do think that now it's even tougher to win on the road in the Big 12 than it was before, which was already a very daunting task.
Yeah, it's the toughest conference to win on the road in far and away. Not only is the hardest conference in general, but you look at if I go to DePaul, and I think the Big East is still the second best conference in college basketball, especially with St. John's and how much better they've got. But if I go to DePaul, I'm not that worried. If I go to West Virginia, as we saw with Kansas 91-85 loss, I'm worried. If I go to Gallagher-Iba in Stillwater, Oklahoma, we saw Baylor struggle there a couple of weeks back, and it seems like Oklahoma State's still giving people fits at home or on the road. You saw 70-66. They could have and maybe should have won the game against Kansas State late. You look at a UCF who also knocked off Kansas at home. What you're seeing, a lot of teams that are better. A lot of teams that are better will go on the road, play an inferior opponent at their place. I still think Kansas is better than UCF. I know Kansas is better than West Virginia, but they lost by virtue of the fact that this road gauntlet in the Big 12 is awful. It's tough to win. And honestly, Greg, to say that, you still have to count yourself blessed when you win as the home team because the amount of close games that we've seen in Big 12 play. I'll pick on a team like Texas. That win against Baylor at home was massive because now they have Oklahoma, BYU, Houston, TCU, and Iowa State on the docket. They move into the first week of February with 5 ranked games, 3 of those coming on the road as well. You don't get a break. At home or on the road, you don't get a break, but especially on a night where you're not in your own gymnasium, it's tough to win.
Yeah, it certainly is tough to win, and I feel like the Big 12 out of all the conferences, they've got the fewest amount of breaks as well because in the Big 10, even though it is a relatively brutal conference to win on the road in as well, we have seen some of these teams like a Penn State, even though they've won a few games, it's been a little bit up and down for them. Mm-hmm. You mentioned it out there in the Big East. I mean, DePaul right now, George Mikan is rolling over in his grave watching what we are seeing there. That is clearly the worst team in that conference. But even though there is, in my opinion, a clear bottom team in the Big 12, and that would be West Virginia. Not sure how their Tuesday game turned out against Central Florida as we record this. They're a team that's starting to rise up, and if they can get Jesse Edwards back in the fold, that could be one of the toughest, shall we say, bottom dwellers out there in all of these power conferences in general, just because with this West Virginia team, they still have a really good home court advantage, even though they're visibly down this year.
Yeah, that's one thing that you can never count West Virginia out for, and that is the home court advantage because the passion of the fan base. They know, Greg, that the card that they were dealt. Look, the fans had nothing to do with what happened with Bob Huggins. This is one of the most passionate groups in the Big 12 because in West Virginia, there is not professional sports. Their NFL, their NBA is West Virginia Mountaineer Athletics. They didn't cause the turmoil that has made this basketball season so tumultuous. So they still show up. They still give their all for the university because there are some places where you get the t-shirt fans. At West Virginia, to be a West Virginia fan, you've got to be ingrained in it, and you've always been ingrained in it. And that's what makes it a tough place to play. Not only that, Who's got the convenient travel to West Virginia? Nobody's hopping on the bus to go 45 minutes. You go from a Baylor down to Austin. You go from TCU down to Waco. Even from a TCU, Fort Worth to Lubbock, you're looking at an hour-long flight, hour-and-a-half flight. West Virginia is tough to get to. You couple that with a passionate fan base, and look, they're not going to make the tournament. They're going to finish below 500 this year, but they just beat Kansas. They're going to beat teams in Morgantown because that's just the culture at West Virginia. And I think they could even be dangerous in the Big 12 tournament because by the time you get to that, Greg, we're already beaten up. This league is already beaten up. By the time you get to the Big 12 tournament, all bets are off. I have no idea what's going to happen. Even Oklahoma State, who's struggled to buy a win, could scare some people because Mike Boynton, in my opinion, is still a good basketball coach, a capable basketball coach. I could have argued that Oklahoma State or West Virginia are your nights off, but they're just not. There is no night off.
Yeah, there truly is not, as Drake told. He takes no days off himself. He does amazing work over at the Locked On Big 12 podcast. He is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And what I think is interesting about the Big 12 right now is the two teams that entered into the week, number one, Kansas State and Texas Tech. Don't think a lot of people had that on their bingo card. And when it comes to what we're going to be getting on Wednesday, this Kansas State versus Iowa State game, I do think that it's so interesting because if there is a team that I think is going to see a little bit of regression, it's Kansas State, a team that I still remember. They win by 1 in overtime at home against North Alabama. They had that nip and tuck game out of conference against Villanova. This team, time and time again, heck, they were taking overtime by Oral Roberts, but they seem to just be finding a way right now. I'm not sure how you take a look at Kansas State because I do have my red flags, but every single time this team is in a close game, it feels like they pull it out. Sans that game, ironically enough, against Texas Tech.
Yeah, it reminds me, Greg, of 2022-23 Kansas State. I guess that's what Jerome Tang is going to do. It's not always going to be pretty, but he's going to find a way, and he's going to do it in different ways. We've seen Kansas State dominate defensively. What comes to mind immediately is that game against Central Florida where they allowed 52 points. We've seen them win when they struggle offensively. Then we put up 62 against Chicago State, 62-55. You could argue that's the ugliest win that they put together this season, but they still got it done when the shots weren't falling. To me, the one thing that I circle with Kansas State that might be a hot topic right now and something that a lot of people want to balk at because the name is so big in college basketball, I don't think Tyler Perry is there yet. I don't think he can be the catalyst to go win you a game in March late, give the ball to him, and he's going to be reliable. He is a free throw king. He's going to take contact. He's going to get it to the hoop. But right now, I haven't seen enough consistently out of Tyler Perry to say that Kansas State isn't just lightning in a bottle that could escape. Again, I'm not going to bet against them because Jerome Tang did it last year and they had an unbelievable run late in the season, and they're going to do, I think they could do that again. I'm going to need more from Tyler Perry for them to win the Big 12. And I do think that by the time we get to the end of this, they're sitting at 4th or 5th in the conference, which is still nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah, but when it comes to this Kansas State team, certainly I don't think that Tyler Perry is what we saw to Marquise Noel last season, but I'm very impressed by Arthur Kaluma as well. He's a guy that I had some question marks with coming out of Creighton, and it feels like his game is just such a more advanced version of it this year, especially with the way that he's been able to pop threes. So